You will hear this story for the first time only in this video. Do not forget to write your comments about the story. Have a good listen. Perla sat alone in the dimly lit living room of her family's small house, the soft glow of the lamp casting long shadows across the walls. Outside, the night air was still, the silence broken only by the occasional chirp of crickets and the distant hum of passing cars. As she sat there, lost in her thoughts, the sound of her parents' car pulling out of the driveway echoed through the quiet street. They were off to visit relatives in the next town, leaving Perla alone in the house for the evening. At first, she welcomed the solitude, enjoying the rare opportunity to have the house to herself. But as the minutes ticked by and the darkness outside deepened, a sense of unease began to settle over her like a heavy blanket. Suddenly, a piercing scream shattered the silence, causing Perla to jump in her seat. Her heart raced in her chest as she strained to listen, her ears pricked for any sign of danger. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the screaming stopped, leaving nothing but an eerie silence in its wake. Perla's hands trembled as she reached for her phone, her fingers fumbling with the buttons as she tried to dial her parents' number. But to her horror, the phone remained silent, its screen dark and unresponsive. Panic surged through her veins as she realized that she was completely cut off from the outside world, alone and vulnerable in the darkness. A sudden movement outside caught her eye, and Perla froze in terror as she saw a tall, shadowy figure lurking in the darkness. Its features were obscured by the night, but Perla could feel its malevolent gaze boring into her like a knife. With a trembling hand, she reached for the nearest weapon she could find, a heavy vase sitting on the coffee table beside her. Holding it tightly in her grasp, she edged towards the window, her heart pounding in her chest as she prepared to confront whatever lurked outside. But as she peered into the darkness, the figure was gone, vanished into thin air like a wisp of smoke. Perla's breath caught in her throat as she scanned the empty street, her senses on high alert for any sign of danger. For what felt like an eternity, she stood there, frozen in fear, her mind racing with 1,000 terrifying possibilities. Was it a trick of the light, a figment of her imagination, or something far more sinister lurking in the shadows? Unable to shake the feeling of impending doom that hung heavy in the air, Perla retreated into the safety of the house, locking the doors and drawing the curtains tight against the night. But even as she sought refuge in the familiar surroundings of her home, the sense of unease lingered like a dark cloud overhead, casting a pall of fear over everything she knew and loved. Hours passed in agonizing silence as Perla sat alone in the darkness, her senses on high alert for any sign of danger. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the curtains sent shivers down her spine as she waited for the inevitable. And then, just as she was beginning to believe that she was safe, a sound echoed through the house, a soft, insidious whisper that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere all at once. Perla's blood ran cold as she listened, her heart pounding in her chest as the whispers grew louder, more urgent. It was as if the very walls of the house were alive with the sound of malevolent voices, whispering secrets too terrible to comprehend. With a sense of mounting dread, Perla realized that she was not alone in the house, that something dark and sinister had taken up residence in the shadows, watching her every move with eyes that gleamed with malice. With trembling hands, she reached for the vase once more, her knuckles white with fear as she prepared to defend herself against whatever horror lurked in the darkness. But before she could take another step, a sudden movement caught her eye. A figure emerging from the shadows, its features obscured by the darkness as it advanced towards her with slow, deliberate steps. Perla's heart hammered in her chest as she backed away, her mind racing with 1,000 terrifying possibilities. Who was this intruder, and what did they want with her? With a sinking feeling in the pit of her stomach, Perla realized that she was face to face with a killer who had been terrorizing the town for weeks. The same killer who had claimed the lives of countless innocent victims, leaving nothing but fear and despair in their wake. With nowhere left to run, Perla braced herself for the inevitable, her hands trembling with fear as she prepared to make her final stand against the darkness. But just as the killer loomed over her, poised to strike, a sudden noise shattered the silence, a loud, piercing wail that echoed through the house like a cry for help. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the noise stopped, leaving nothing but an eerie silence in its wake. Perla's heart raced as she listened, her senses on high alert for any sign of danger. But to her surprise, the killer had vanished, leaving no trace of their presence behind. With a sense of relief washing over her, Perla collapsed to the floor, her body trembling with exhaustion and fear. As she lay there in the darkness, Perla realized that she had narrowly escaped death, saved by a stroke of luck or perhaps something far more sinister. But even as she breathed a sigh of relief, she knew that the killer was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for their next opportunity to strike. And so, with a heavy heart and a mind filled with dread, Perla vowed to never let her guard down again, to always remain vigilant against the darkness that lurked just beyond the safety of her own home. For in a small town gripped by fear and despair, there was no telling when the killer would strike again, leaving nothing but death and destruction in their wake. And Perla knew that she would do whatever it took to survive, to outwit the darkness and emerge victorious in the end. As the night wore on, Perla's sense of unease only grew stronger, the whispers of the killer's presence lingering in the air like a foul stench. With every passing moment, the shadows seemed to close in around her, suffocating her with their oppressive weight. Desperation clawed at Perla's chest as she searched frantically for a means of escape, her mind racing with 1,000 terrifying possibilities. But no matter how hard she tried, the doors remained locked, the windows sealed shut against the encroaching darkness. And then, just when it seemed as though all hope was lost, the killer emerged from the shadows, their twisted form illuminated by the dim light of the moon. Perla's screams echoed through the empty house as she realized that there was nowhere left to run, nowhere left to hide. With a savage grin, the killer advanced towards her, their eyes burning with a fierce intensity as they closed in for the kill. Perla's heart pounded in her chest as she braced herself for the inevitable, her mind consumed with a primal terror unlike anything she had ever known. And then, with a swift and merciless strike, the killer silenced her screams forever, leaving nothing but silence in their wake. As Perla's lifeless body slumped to the floor, the darkness descended upon the house like a shroud, swallowing her whole and sealing her fate in its icy embrace. And so, in a small town gripped by fear and despair, another victim fell prey to the killer's insatiable thirst for blood, their death a grim reminder of the horrors that lurked in the shadows. And as the night stretched on into eternity, the town remained trapped in a never-ending nightmare, its streets stained with the blood of the innocent and its residents living in constant fear of the darkness that lurked just beyond their doorsteps.